On October 1st, 2017, 64-year-old Stephen Paddock opened fire on the Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas, Nevada. With more than 50 confirmed deaths and nearly 500 wounded from the attack, it is now known as the deadliest mass shooting in the history of the United States. Now, most people might think, how does this directly affect me? I didn't know anyone in the shooting. Well, the answer is it may not have directly affected you. However, it is important to realize that as much as we hate to admit it, shootings are a common occurrence in the United States. So much so that according to the Minnesota CBS, nearly 1/3 of all mass shootings worldwide occur in the United States. I personally have never known anyone who has experienced or known someone else who has experienced the effect from a shooting. However, regardless of my lack of connections, it is clear to me that shootings are appearing far too often nowadays. Knowing the fact that the United States mass shootings make up nearly 5% of the world's shootings brings into question the stability of the United States Constitution and the fundamental rights granted within the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is consistently called into question by Congress and past presidents. So today we will discuss the history of this amendment and what the pros and cons of this amendment are, and finally we will take a look at the systems who have previously tried to impose gun laws and what their experiments concluded. From there, it is up to you to decide whether or not the Second Amendment is a fundamental staple in the Constitution or if it's something that needs to be omitted. Before any decisions are made, we need to look back in history and figure out what the moment means and why it was created in order to better understand what its purpose is. Like many rules and laws, the Second Amendment came about because the people did not want history repeating itself. In the 17th century, English colonists immigrated to America to escape the tyrannical reign of King James. In order to prevent further oppression, they wrote the Constitution of the United States of America on September 17, 1787. For additional protection, they added the certain unalienable rights in the Bill of Rights on December 15, 1791, producing the Second Amendment and the rest of the amendments. As history shows, throughout the Revolutionary War, Britain taxed the colonists' goods in order to hold power over them. Due to the rights given in the Second Amendment, which states a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Colonists were able to defend themselves by bearing arms against the British government. Without this right, the colonists would have lost the war, therefore falling back under the control of England and their oppressive king. Because of the bravery of the colonists who stood up to their king, we are our own independent nation and we follow the rules that we implemented for ourselves. Now that the history of the Second Amendment is clear, we understand what it means, we can properly assess both the pros and cons of this part of the Constitution. This amendment has many pros, however, none are more significant than the two I will discuss in this speech. With the right to own a gun, the chances of criminal attack are significantly decreased. According to John Lott, PhD, there was an 8.5% reduction in homicides, 7% in aggravated assaults, 5% in rape, and 3% in robbery. These numbers may not seem big, however, even the smallest decreases make the biggest impact and save lives. The second pro is the sense of safety this amendment gives us. The easiest way to explain this is if you had to walk into an unsafe neighborhood, would you A, want a knife, or B, want a gun? Which would make you feel safer? The question to this answer is you would feel safer with a gun, hands down. And if you don't agree with that, that's not true. Because you're more likely to defend yourself with a weapon that can help you further away versus one that you can only use up close. As human beings, we seek out safety and warmth, according to my intimate relations lecture. Therefore, we will tend to stick to something that will give us a better chance of defending ourselves versus something that will do little to no damage, such as the knife. Now that we've discussed the pros, we'll move on to the cons. Due to the right given to every citizen, a majority of people are able or have the access to possess a gun, which means there is an increased potential for gun-related incidents. When obtaining a license for guns, it is not necessary for one to be excellent at using their weapon. Therefore, they don't have to do a shooting test in order to obtain a gun. So, there have been many accidents where someone was mishandling the gun and ended up seriously injuring another person. The other con that is important to consider is because of the easier accessibility to guns, there are more guns for criminals to obtain either from illegal purchase or theft. According to an alcohol, tobacco, and firearm study, 13% of arrested convicts admitted to stealing their guns and comment about how easily it is to obtain a gun from the black market or through theft. Either way, there will be an increase in crime rates because of the easier access to guns. The pros and cons of the Second Amendment make it incredibly difficult to judge whether or not this is a positive staple to leave in the Constitution. Therefore, the third and final point of my speech is to inform the public about situations where gun control has been tested and what the results of the experiment has found. The first study was done in England. Following the passing of the gun laws, the crime rates increased. This is due to the fact that there was no way the citizens could defend their homes or themselves when criminals broke in. This study goes as far as to say, and quote, 80 years of increasingly stringent gun regulations, the strictest gun regulations of any democracy, have failed to stop or even slow the rise in gun crime, end quote. Along with this study in England, another was done in Australia. It was passed by the Prime Minister, John Howard, and it moved to enact a nationwide gun law reform known as the National Firearms Agreement, or the NFA. This act included, and I quote, 2 nationwide gun buybacks, voluntary surrenders, state gun amnesties, a ban on the importation of new automatic and semi-automatic weapons, the tightening of gun owner licensing, and the creation of uniform national standards for gun registration. Upon the enactment of this agreement, Australia destroyed an estimated 650,000 firearms, which was about 1/5 of their stock. This act did decrease the amount of deaths by firearm, obviously. However, crime rates in Australia stayed the same, with the exception of robbery rates increasing after this was put into motion. These 2 cases are important to learn about and understand because it is imperative to know the facts of both sides before deciding the fate of the Second Amendment. The United States Constitution's Second Amendment is one of the biggest controversies that plagues Congress, citizens, and the President because of the feasible ability to see both sides. By learning about the history of this amendment, the pros and cons, and the studies already conducted that reverse this amendment, it is easier to come to a conclusion about whether or not the Second Amendment is useful and necessary in the Constitution. So the question is, would you feel safer with a gun or a butter knife?